it's simply natural to want to explore the past of your city.
Everybody who'd ever did anything in Lynchburg was about 50 years old and a white male. Well, we knew that couldn't possibly be so.
I can see the people in this book who lived at different eras coming together and being in conversation with each other and enjoying each other's company. It's amazing. You think a 17-year-old is behind the establishing of a ferry across the James River.
Jefferson, and there was a lot about this in 76, was supposedly the first person to eat a tomato in Lynchburg.
One Guggenheimer makes uniforms for the Confederacy, and his descendant has clothing there to sell to the veterans when they come home from the war. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to reach the next generation and say, these are your people.
Welcome to another edition of No Holds Barred. I'm Rich Roth, and today my guests are Clif and Bundy Potter, who edited the new book that's out, A Good and Pleasant Company, Lives and Legacies of Central Virginia. And first of all, let me welcome you both to the show. Thank you for joining me. How are you guys?
We're just fine.
Yeah. Thank you for asking it.
And this book is a result of the LYH 250 committee and everything that we're seeing going on in the area and in the region right now as it pertains to the 250th anniversary of the United States of America. And tell me a little bit about, well, before we dive into the book and how this evolved, let's talk a little bit about you guys and your background, both retired professors at Lynchburg College, now, of course, the University of Lynchburg, history professors. You've done a lot on the history of Lynchburg. But let's talk a little bit about your background first. How far back do you guys go? Did you meet at the University of Lynchburg?
Yes, we did.
Actually, we met during the sort of welcome week. We met on a church bus, and I got on the bus because I didn't have anything else to do that particular afternoon, and I thought I needed to see Lynchburg because, unlike him, I am not a native. I'm from the Valley of Virginia, and sat down and took a book and started to read.
Now, the bus was empty except for the one person who was on there. I was a junior and in charge of the tour, and I got there early, and I don't know where the driver was, but I got on the bus, and sitting about three-quarters of the way back on the left-hand side was this, obviously, freshman co-ed, as we said in those days. And I had seen a cartoon in the New Yorker where a sailor goes up to a woman who's on an empty bus and says, "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" And I thought, well, why not? So I came up and big smile and said, "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" And she said,
"No."
"May I join you?"
Suit yourself.
Which I did.
I thought he was trying to pick me up. And I thought, he thinks that's the way it's going to be here. He can forget it.
You're a tougher nut to crack than that one, huh?
Oh, yeah. But I gave her the sell on what a friendly school it was and all the rest of it.
And I didn't believe that either. I was planning on transferring second semester.
So we got the next morning, Monday morning, I came into second-year French, and she was sitting on the front row, and there was a seat next to her. And I came up and made the same request in French, and she said,
"Mais oui, certainement."
And we've been sitting next to each other ever since.
Wow. So, yeah, you accepted them in all different languages.
Oh, yeah, but, French, it works in French.
French is prettier.
It works in French.
Yeah, if you've got a line, it sounds better in French.
And I realized that what he had said was true, that Lynchburg College, it was Lynchburg College then, and it will always be for us older alumni, was a friendly school. I'd come from a fairly stratified high school, and I thought that, this was just what you did the first 2 weeks. But you could talk to seniors just like to your fellow freshmen. And when the time came and my parents asked me, "Do you want to transfer?" I said, "No, I'd like to stay here." Essentially, I've been in Lynchburg and at Lynchburg College almost ever since.
We won't mention the year, but yeah.
They can look and guess.
Oh, yeah.
They know what color my hair is.
Yeah, 1960.
So you both wind up teaching at
Yes.
Lynchburg College, both history as well.
Yes.
Yes.
European here and American there.
And tell me about the history of Lynchburg. When, what had you guys so entranced? Because you've done a ton of work. As a matter of fact, it was about a year ago that one of my first guests was Ed Burnett, the retired judge, and he had recommended that I speak to you guys about the history of Lynchburg. So obviously the history of this area has been big, even though you taught European and American history at Lynchburg College. Obviously the history of Lynchburg is still very, very important. And,
All history is local, in a sense.
I'm a native. I was born here. In fact, I'm a real Lynchburger because I was born within the sound of the courthouse bell, which is sort of like a real Londoner is born within the sound of Bow bells, but for us, it's within the sound of the old courthouse bell. And I guess I grew up with it. My grandfather was a repository of all kinds of information, historic and otherwise, and it's simply natural to want to explore the past of your city, and so I had begun to do that when I was in high school. But once we married and moved to Lynchburg, we were disturbed by the book that was used in the city schools, that was written in the 1920s.
And you could tell everybody who'd ever did anything in Lynchburg was about 50 years old and a white male. Well, we knew that couldn't possibly be so. And so we started doing research and discovered that teenagers created the Ferry, which was the beginning of Lynchburg. John Lynch and his brothers were young men. You had if you were going to succeed on the frontier, you had to be a young man, odds on.
So this is not your first book about Lynchburg.
Oh, no. First one came out in 1976 for the bicentennial, 50 years ago, which seems like yesterday. And then we did a second edition of that, and then we've done, 2 or 3 more?
Well, Lynchburg set on 7 Hills, Lynchburg
2007, and Lynchburg Then and Now, which is pictures of what it looked like then and what it looks like now. And that has proven to be one of the most popular books we've done. But one of the hardest to do, but a very popular book.
Why was it so hard?
It's easy to pick the old pictures. Let's say you're going to have 50 pictures of Lynchburg at various points in time. And there are some old ones that date back to the 19th century. And so you think, okay, here's a thing on Main Street, and there's it's not paved, and there's some mules and horses. And then you think, all right, where was this? And you try to look for some sort of landmark, and it's not easy. And so half the fun or half the work was scurrying around with some of the pictures and figuring out, no, it wasn't on that street. And sometimes the only thing that would give you a clue was the corner of a building that you could barely see that still survived from 1920 or 1880 or whatever. So it was like solving a puzzle.
Well, one of those pictures that scared the life out of me, I have acrophobia. It's the 1918 end of the war, and it's the Victory Parade coming home from World War I, which ended in November of 18. And it's a shot taken from on the top of a building. And we figured out what building it was, and we got permission to go up, and she's the photographer. But in order to get the same shot, she had to lean out over the edge of the building, and I held her while she did it, and I was scared to death, because I'm not going to look over the edge of that thing. But she was just cheerfully snapping away, and we got a really good picture.
I have acrophobia too, but at times like that, you just can't think about it.
It's just that easy, huh?
It's what has to be done.
So, obviously you guys have a great knowledge of the history of Lynchburg, had done books, had done research, all that. So it seems somewhat natural that you both would be involved in this project. Talk about a good and pleasant company. This book, it's available at Old City Cemetery as well as at Gibbons Bookstore.
That's right.
And it's 250 influential people in the history of Lynchburg. But before we dive into the book, talk about how it came to be, right? I mean, the LYH 250 committee, talking about different events and things that they were planning to help celebrate the 250th anniversary of, America. How did the book come into play?
Well, it goes back 50 years, the idea. When we did the first history, we included a number, not what, how many, about 8 or 10?
About 8 or 10 short biographies of people in Lynchburg who were important to the history and development of the city. And we thought, this is nice. This would be fun to have a whole book of them. But it just didn't happen. When we did the other books, the publisher was very specific about what they wanted, and cameos or mini biographies, as we called them, were something they were interested in.
So other projects came along, both projects in our own areas of expertise, and then doing another history of Lynchburg. And because being scholars, we would explore, for me, in the Elizabethan England, and she, of course, is a Mozart scholar. Well, your book was on Philadelphia.
Yeah. I became interested in popular culture and how there are certain names and certain people that we just know. If I say Mozart, you have an idea of who I'm talking about. You don't say Mozart who. He's a musician. He was famous. He died young. There was a movie about him. But how did we know that? Because even though Wolfgang Mozart, knew about the United States and actually wrote about the revolution when he was working in Paris, he never came here. So how did America, the United States, discover Mozart, and where was Mozart's music first played and why? And it happened to be in Philadelphia. And Mozart was still very much alive at the time, though he did not know that somebody in Philadelphia was playing one of his piano sonatas. So I explored this as part of my PhD work in American history.
And I got to go around and look at good places to eat. and Philadelphia is a gourmet's paradise. So I had the good job.
It's a lovely city, and everybody was very nice.
And I had to lug around huge...
Wait, everybody was very nice in Philadelphia?
Yes.
Yeah.
Have you followed their sports teams much?
Well, I stayed up late last night watching the World Cup, for what that's worth.
Southern charm will accomplish a number of things.
Yeah, Philadelphia folks can be kind of rough if they need to be, from what I understand.
Yeah.
But back to the book and the LYH 250 committee, and as they're planning all these different events, talk about the evolution of the idea of the book.
Well, there were a group of us meeting at the Old City Cemetery at that time and just brainstorming about what we'd like to do and what we thought would appeal to folks in the city, different kinds of things. Ashley Meyer was the chairman, sort of chairing the committee folks, and I guess there were maybe 15 or 20 of us initially. And, of course, they talked about the bateau races and what, it's not really a race, the bateau crawl down the James, and what could be done to sort of do entertainment on the riverside and to get other people down there to see craftspeople and to eat, and there would be a concert and things like that, and some other events, and maybe a Christmas parade, and one or the other of us said, but there's got to be something permanent. There always is. Every time the city celebrates something, there is something. Even at the beginning, there was a booklet.
1886.
So there has to be a publication, and we're the ones to do it. And somebody said, well, all right, you proposed it. How do you think we should do this? And we started talking about it, and it evolved from there. Volunteer writers each writing a page essay about a group of people, and then everyone started brainstorming about who should we put in besides the Lynches and the Shules and people whose names everybody knew. And so our assignment for the next time we met was to come back, each of us with a list of about 15 or 20 people. And we started sort of thrashing it out from there.
So talk about the criteria for selecting these people.
They have to be dead.
That's it.
That's it.
That's the whole criteria.
That's it. They have to be dead.
Dead and someone who contributed something
To
the
Lynchburg.
city.
No matter how big or small.
Yes.
Yes.
Or no matter how direct or indirect.
And some of these people were born here, lived their entire lives in Lynchburg. Others were here for 6 months. And yet, they made an unbelievable contribution to the city and set in motion forces that are still with us today. So they're people who are deceased but made a contribution to Central Virginia that has created the city we live in today and the counties around it.
And it sort of naturally fell into 5 sections. So that's 50 per section. It becomes manageable. It sort of governed itself as to numbers and that kind of thing.
This next question I ask is going to sound terrible, and I don't mean it to be that way. But I'll ask it anyway. Who do you wish may have been dead so that they could have been included in the book, but weren't included in the book because they're still living? Is there anyone that jumps to mind?
I can't think of anybody off.
No.
No, not really.
Really? Okay.
Though we do have some names that we wish we had been able to put in, but you can't just say, well, I'll just add an extra essay. It doesn't work that way.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, 250 people.
Well, more than that, really.
Actually, because there's several husband and wife teams.
They're combinations, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, there are 250 essays.
Yes.
So adding any more, obviously.
Yeah, every time you add one, you have to. Well, you work with signatures, and that's 16 pages. And
well, but it's also the 250th anniversary, so
Yes.
to kind of keep numbers nice and
does.
round, that makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
So the book starts off. Well, all right. Tell me about the title. A Good and Pleasant Company, Lives and Legacies of Central Virginia. Where did you get the title A Good and Pleasant Company?
I came up with it 50 years ago. I said, if we do a book like this, we ought to call it A Good and Pleasant Company. And so it's been around for a while.
Why? Why A Good and Pleasant?
Well, it sounds
nice.
I'm an English historian. It sounds like something you get in an English textbook. A Good and Pleasant Company.
It sounds a little bit Shakespearean, don't you think?
Kind of, and maybe even Regency, but it's got a nice ring to it.
It's euphonious.
Yeah, most book titles are really bad.
Or they're in your face. We didn't want to be in anybody's face.
And someone said, but how are they going to know what it is? And they suggested Lives and Legacies of Central Virginia, because that's what it covers.
So this book, I mean, it's not necessarily specifically about everybody in Lynchburg, but it's the greater Lynchburg area.
That's right.
Yes.
And by the way, I can see the people in this book who lived at different eras coming together and being in conversation with each other and enjoying each other's company. It's on some celestial plane. And because it's a really very interesting people in this book.
Let's talk a little bit about the first few people that you guys have essays about in this book, sort of responsible for the founding of Lynchburg. How did Lynchburg come to be?
It was a gift. Christopher Clark, the father of the mother of you might say, of Lynchburg, Sarah Clark Lynch, gave Sarah and her husband, Charles Lynch Sr., a piece of land on the banks of the James River, and as a gift.
And interestingly enough, Charles Lynch Sr., an indentured servant who came over from Europe, correct?
Came from Ireland.
Came from Ireland.
He was an immigrant.
As an indentured servant who Mr. Clark purchased.
That's right.
and he wound up marrying his daughter, which
Well,
is
he's
something
Irish. That's the charming kind of thing that they could do. Having Irish blood, I can say that.
Well, when you're indentured, you could be from 3 to 7 years or as many as 10. And essentially, you are at the mercy of your master or mistress if you've been purchased by a female or a female inherits you. It could be a good life, and in his case, it was. Charles was fortunate, partly because the Quakers become involved. But you could more or less be worked to death because it's cheaper to get another indenture than to, say, buy a slave.
but fairly uncommon for an indentured servant to marry the daughter of his master.
Yeah, it is. It really is.
America is the land of opportunity.
But she was a woman who knew her own mind, and if she made up her mind that she was going to marry this charming, handsome Irishman, no power on earth can stop her.
You don't know he's handsome. There are no pictures of him.
No, they're
He
not.
keeps going back to the charming, handsome Irishman. I mean,
He must have some Irish blood somewhere.
I do. A little bit.
so they wind up getting married. They inherit some money, and then their sons actually start a ferry company running back and forth.
Now, Charles Sr. had established a ferry on the Rivanna River near Charlottesville. So they were used to this. They'd seen their father do it. And unfortunately, when they moved to this part of Virginia, he died shortly thereafter. And so the boys were left to help their mother sort of make a go of it here in the wilderness, because it was wilderness. And it's amazing. You think a 17-year-old is behind the establishing of a ferry across the James River, which is a very treacherous river. So it was a real boon to people moving to the west, and they started it at absolutely the right moment. In 1756, the French and Indian War begins, and it will last until 1763. And until 56, the frontier had been closed
By the British government.
so that there wouldn't be difficulties with the French. But when the war begins, it's no holds barred, as you say. The frontier is open, go out there and establish your claim. And so people moving westward into the Ohio country, coming up from the eastern part of Virginia and from northern North Carolina, would perhaps move up to Lynchburg, cross the river, and then head west through what is now Campbell County. And that was a route west until the end of the war, and they closed it off again. And people moving in that direction thought, well, I kind of like the land around here. And we could put in a nice crop of tobacco in this soil. It's perfect. And so instead of heading into the Ohio country, they just stayed put and settled down in Bedford, Campbell, Amherst, Appomattox counties. Well, they weren't counties then, but they will become so. And so you've got this ferry that takes people across both ways, and they're going to start growing tobacco, and the tobacco is going to go down to Richmond by water. So it's perfect location. And there's nothing wrong with making money for a Quaker as long as it's done honestly. And they were scrupulously honest. And they did not overcharge for their services, and they provided exactly what they said you're going to be paying for. And so it's a very successful enterprise. And the boys are involved in it, and the next generation will be involved in it. And
it wasn't just a ferry get you across the river. Okay, here you are. Here's your stuff. Go west, young man or and young woman. They also had a house where you could get food. You could probably stay the night. And so there was a place where people could say, well, I'm going to get to know these people who have helped me get across the river. This land looks pretty good. And so people began to gather around the river and around the ferry house and the buildings that are associated with it.
And it was really almost all about tobacco at that point, correct?
It wasn't called the Golden Leaf for nothing, and it's one reason that Lynchburg was the second wealthiest town. Well, city. Was it city by then?
It was a city by then.
City by then.
1855.
Before the Civil War, second only to New Bedford, Massachusetts, and its wealth was in the whale oil industry.
Yeah, the second largest per capita income in the United States. But you got a guy coming through and he says to his wife, they don't have a blacksmith here. Why don't I try to set up a forge here? And it looks like there'll be plenty of business. And then other people come through who have crafts and skills, and they think, this might be a good place to settle. I think we can make a living here. John Lynch owned the property, and he divided it into lots, and you could buy a lot and build a house and have your shop there. And streets are muddy, but, you can make do. And we'll just settle down here and stay here. And they did.
And John Lynch was very generous. If they needed some land for a courthouse, and this comes along a little bit later, he'll basically deed it to them. They, at one point, said, we need a jail. By this time, enough people were there that they were getting into trouble, so he gave land for the jail. Well, when they built the jail, they sort of made a mistake, and it turned out that the jail was part of it, wasn't actually on the property. So were the people who were in the jail, in the wrong part of the jail, free, or were they still prisoners of the Lynchburg officialdom? And they had to annex a little bit more land to make the jail work out all right. So
our first annexation was the courthouse and the jail.
So obviously now Lynchburg's got tons of churches, is looked at as a very religious type of town. Big part of that, obviously, Liberty and Dr. Falwell. But even back at the very beginnings, you guys are talking about the Quakers. And so religion's always been a big part of...
But not in the city. Not in
the
the
town. City, okay.
The Quaker meeting house was out in the country.
There was briefly an Anglican church, but after the Revolution, it dissolved.
And the building burned.
And the building burned down. And so when Lorenzo Dow, who was a traveling evangelist, came to Lynchburg, there were no churches in the city. Well, it would have been in the town at that point. And Dow is an interesting character, and I've always been fascinated with him. And I was glad to be able to sort of put him in the book. He grew up in the time of the Great Awakening, and he had a sort of troubled mind religiously. And he became an evangelist, and he would come to towns, and he was sort of wild. He didn't cut his hair. He didn't bathe. He slept in the woods. He would call out people for their wickedness and what he perceived as their wickedness, and he referred to Lynchburg as the seat of Satan's kingdom. Well, I thought this was wonderful and thought it would make a great title for a book, and Cliff said, no, I don't think so. But he did do that down in the middle of Main Street, essentially, because there were no churches in Lynchburg. There were plenty of taverns, there were livery stables, there were tobacco warehouses, but there was not a church. And no one invited him in to generally preach in their home because, as I said, he wasn't very clean. But a number of people who listened to him were moved to create a Methodist church within the city limits. And so he succeeded in what he wanted to do, and then he moved on.
And many of the early churches in the frontier areas were Baptist or Methodist. And a Methodist minister would serve maybe several churches. And so we began to earn that nickname, City of Churches. Anne Royal, who came through...
And about what point in time was that?
This is the late 18th, early 19th century.
Okay.
Anne Royal came through Lynchburg, I think, late 30s or 40s, thought there were too many churches. But there was a Masonic lodge by the end of the 18th century, and there was a Methodist church and the Baptist churches. The Presbyterians show up, and then the the Episcopalians And finally, in the 1840s, you got a large enough Catholic population.
Because they're building the canal using Irish labor.
And pretty diverse religious makeup in Lynchburg by the middle of the 19th century.
So again, we're talking with Clif and Bundy Potter, historians, retired professors at the University of Lynchburg, and editors, not authors, but editors of this book, A Good and Pleasant Company, which has just been released recently as part of the LYH 250 celebration. 250 essays about prominent people who were influential in Lynchburg, either over a long period of time or a short period of time. And you had mentioned that you broke it up into 5 different sections, 50 people or essays, because some essays are about multiple people, husbands and wives or whatever. But talk about the 5 different sections.
By the way, I want to make one point. It's an anthology.
Okay.
The copyright of the title is owned by the Lynchburg Historic Foundation, but the essays, because they are a part of an anthology, they are the property of the writers. So if at some point in time they want to publish their essay somewhere else, they can do it without anyone's permission because it's their property. But the 5 sections coincide with the anniversaries of the Declaration of Independence, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration, 1826, the centennial, 1876, the sesquicentennial, 1926, the bicentennial, 1976, and now I can never remember what they call it. The
Semi-quincentennial, whatever.
So was it tough? Because I'm imagining that there are a number of people who crossed over the different eras, right?
Yes.
Who were influential in Lynchburg, maybe between, 1976 and now or before, right? I mean, there are people who crossed over. Was it tough figuring out which era everyone belonged in?
Not really. One example, Preston Glenn. Preston Glenn was a lieutenant in the Army Air Force and Lynchburger, and he was shot down over the Western Front in 1918. Now, he's a relatively young man. He was born in one section, and you would think that normally he would be in the section that goes from 1926 to 1976, but he never had that chance. So he is in the section where he was born, and not in the section where, if he were an ordinary citizen who had not gone to the war, might have made his mark. So we had to put him before 1926 because he died in 1918. So, and there are some people whose importance bridges 2 sections, and so we could move them either one way or the other.
An example of that would be what?
Let's see.
E.C. Glass?
Yeah, the superintendent of the schools.
Or Georgia Morgan, maybe?
Georgia Morgan. Helen Wood would be another
Yes.
one. There are a number of people who bridge those sections, and they were important from 26 up to 76 and beyond that.
Well, it meant making a lot of lists on paper with dates and sort of looking at it and kind of bracketing it, writing it out by hand. And, of course, the meetings kept happening. Every month, another meeting, and more names and more suggestions and talking this over. And the committee tends to get a bit smaller as time goes on. Some of them decided they wanted to work with marketing. Some of them with getting grant money. And we had a wonderful member of the committee who did that, Nancy Young. Though she still came to all the meetings, and she wrote 50 essays, which to me is absolutely amazing. I wrote essays, but I didn't write 50. It was like a sort of mathematical jigsaw puzzle to figure which way are we going with this particular individual.
I would imagine even being historians, right, and knowing a lot about the history of Lynchburg, that as some of these names started popping up and the essays started showing up for the writers, there had to be a handful of people that even you guys weren't really aware of. And
it was more than a handful.
Oh, yeah, it's wonderful.
At the time that we were doing this, I was in physical therapy at Westminster, Canterbury, and my therapist was very interested in what I was doing, and he would ask me how I was coming along. And one day he came in with a smile and said, "I've got somebody for your book." And I said, who? And he said, "Harry Creighton." And I said, "Who?" And he got a great grin then because he had totally stumped me. I didn't know who Harry Creighton was. Harry Creighton is in the book. He was a Lynchburger. He was a vaudeville performer, and he did all sorts of skills with hoops, metal hoops. He could juggle 12 hoops at once. And Nancy Blackwell Marion, who was our publisher and did all the illustrations, actually found a picture of him. And he had a wonderful story. And tragically died at a young age of tuberculosis when he toured Europe with his family. And he's buried in Britain. But I would have never known about Harry Creighton if this hadn't just sort of popped up on my therapist's cell phone.
so tell us the story.
About Harry Creighton?
Yeah, I mean, well, you had kind of touched on the hoops, but the significance to Lynchburg.
He's significant because, number one, he is a person of color. You're going to have to make me
Born
look
in
for him.
Lynchburg, grew up in Lynchburg.
It was a sort of family affair.
I have to tell you this, as a former student, nothing makes me happier than stumping the professors.
It's always fun to stump a professor.
He grows up here.
Well, I mean, it's impossible to know the whole story of 250.
And begins to perform, and the
Okay.
word spreads. And we're in an era before,
It's live theater.
it's live theater, it's before film. And they're always looking for new acts.
And you had vaudeville acts at the Academy and other places. And when you had a team of young people who could take these hoops and somehow, and I don't know how you would do this, create a sort of imaginary miniature village with figures that were inside the hoops, it was really something. We don't know who taught him this skill, but his group included two of his brothers and a sister and his wife. And it's pretty good when you are a vaudeville artist and you have the opportunity to go to Europe and to perform, which he did do. And he also knew who he was. He had a good sense of his own worth. And he made it very clear in some of his writings that African-American performers needed better pay, more recognition, more appreciation. So he was more than just a performer. He was, in his own particular way, during his tragically young life, a civil rights person, even though his dates are 1883, 1912.
You guys mentioned the Academy. You mentioned, previously in our conversation just leading up to today, how important culture and the arts were and still are here in the Lynchburg area.
And it goes back really into the 1820s with amateur theater productions.
Something the Quakers wouldn't have approved of.
Yeah.
But Lynchburg was never really truly a Quaker town. There was never a time in which the Quakers were in the majority because it was too hard to remain a Quaker.
Particularly if you were female.
Just because of the different rules that they had to live
because
by.
Quaker girls, Quaker women, made superb wives. They were talented, they were gifted, they were independently minded and charming. And if you read the records from the South River meeting, there are always these young women that are getting read out of meeting because they're marrying out of meeting. They're marrying a Protestant.
Well, of course, Sarah Clark Lynch did that.
She did it twice.
She was.
She married John Ward at the end.
And just a year before she died, in her 70s, if I'm remembering correctly.
But
And he was a Catholic, so she would really gotten rid out
she
of
got rid of the meeting.
But I mean, you could get rid out of meeting for lots of things: worshiping with Baptists, joining the Masons, marching to music,
Dancing.
So the Quakers weren't very inclusive.
Actually, no. Though they felt everyone had the inner light. Anyone could go to God without the mediation of a minister or a priest. And that got them in trouble a lot because they would come into churches and cut the bell ropes and throw the minister out of the pulpit and essentially tell people to seek God in their own way. But that has nothing to do with the academy, and I've led you off point. I'm sorry.
Well, we can always have fun talking about the Quakers, I guess. But yeah, the academy, the arts. I mean, there are a number of people, who are in this book that are, related to culture, right, and the arts and performing here in the Lynchburg area.
Dance, theater, serious theater, amateur theater. Music, popular as well as serious, and all of the arts, and painting, and it's been a very art-conscious community, really almost from the very beginning.
Athletics, sports, a big part of the history of Lynchburg as well, and you've got a number of former athletes in here. Jim Bibby, one name that comes to mind. Talk a little bit about the importance of we've talked about arts. Let's talk about sports for a minute.
Well, Bullettville Dudley, for instance, was a local boy who really did make good, and
ended up serving a term in the legislature. After his various athletic.
He turned
routes.
to politics, but he still was a great guy, even though he was a politician. He really was.
How do you really feel, Cliff?
Yeah, he was good rep for the city, and just a nice person. But as a UVA graduate, he had a fantastic record when he was at the University of Virginia, and made his home in Lynchburg. He was not born here. Bibby wasn't born here either. But Lynchburg tends to attract people for a number of different reasons. Often the fact that it's a good place to raise family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've heard that for a number of years now. You mentioned UVA, obviously Thomas Jefferson, Poplar Forest, but it was interesting reading a little bit more about his history and the fact that, he came here to really kind of escape Monticello and, everything that was going on in Charlottesville, and wound up, gifting the property here to, was it a daughter or a relative on a wedding, or I'm forgetting the story.
I think to his son-in-law.
To his son-in-law, okay.
Well, of course, Jefferson, and there was a lot about this in 76, was supposedly the first person to eat a tomato in Lynchburg.
Is that right?
Tomatoes.
They kept records of things like that?
Oh, yeah.
Mrs. Owen Owens, who is in the book, had a lovely vegetable garden, and Jefferson was a regular visitor to Lynchburg. In fact, he called Lynchburg the most interesting spot in the state. And that was actually a title of our first book, Lynchburg, the Most Interesting Spot. And so he was happening to be in Lynchburg, and Mrs. Owen had grown these lovely ornamental tomatoes. Well, everybody knew tomatoes were poisonous. They came from Italy, and Italians were poisoners, like Lucretia Borgia and others. And so she thought she would show him this fruit of this beautiful poisonous plant, and she holds it out to him, and he takes it and pops it in his mouth. And she about, I'm sure, died.
Had a tizzy fit, as they say.
Because here is the President of the United States, and he's going to die in her vegetable garden. But he didn't. He said, there's nothing wrong with this. Yes, you don't eat the leaves, but the tomato is perfectly safe to eat. I've eaten many of them when I was in France. And so people began to eat tomatoes in Lynchburg.
The leaves are poisonous.
And everybody loved the tomato story. And at one time, in the 70s and into early 80s, we had a tomato festival here.
Is that right?
And people would bring into the city market various kinds of exotic tomatoes. And there would usually be a Jefferson person who would judge the tomatoes and sort of, talk about Jefferson and his interest in horticulture. He grew 52 kinds of peas. That is really true. He had an experimental farm up area in Monticello, and he loved to get seeds and plants from all sorts of places, and of course he didn't have to tend them. His 200 or so slaves did that, but he would specialize in something. He loved peas, and these were there for his pleasure and that of his visitors.
You mentioned UVA, and someone suggested we do something on Joseph Carrington Cabell, who was from Amherst County. And Cabell helped Jefferson get the bill through the General Assembly to create the University of Virginia. And I thought, well, I'll go and I'll do that one. And I suddenly realized as I was doing it that I would spend my life walking from my dorm room to Cabell Hall, named for this guy that nobody ever said anything. It was just, we're going to go to Cabell. You have class in Cabell. Yeah, I've got to go to Cabell. It's Cabell Hall. It was named for Joseph Carrington Cabell. And I thought, okay. So I'm now able to make a connection between a place where I spent endless hours.
We both did.
And you did too.
Well, the history department's been in Cabell Hall ever since I
forever in
can
the
remember.
basement. And he was an Amherst County boy. He was a lawyer, among other things. But
there were vague, swirling rumors that maybe Mr. Jefferson would found his academical village, as he called it, in Lynchburg.
Yeah.
And people got very excited because, of course, Jefferson came through Lynchburg. There was poplar forest, his country home. And so they even paved a few of the streets in the hope that maybe Jefferson would look favorably upon us and would decide to have his university here. No, he went to Charlottesville.
Yeah, Charlottesville, 1819.
We've talked about the Lynches. You mentioned the Schules. That's another family that's very prominent in the history of Lynchburg. The Guggenheimers also, that you had mentioned previously. Talk a little bit about some of those folks and the impact that they had and why those families were so prevalent and important here in the history of Lynchburg.
And the Opplemans. And, of course, you did the thing on the Opplemans.
The congregation here is fairly old.
Shalom.
It certainly dates into the 19th century. I think, and I'm talking about something I'm not an authority on in any way, but there were Jewish chaplains in the Confederate Army. There were certainly young Jewish men who served both for the Confederacy and the Union. They came from places where they did not have a choice about what they could do. The Opplemans, for instance, came from Russia. Jacob and Lena Oppleman, and they fled Russia because of a pogrom, basically when the Russian government would come in and just simply wipe out an entire village, or maybe several of them, because these people were not Russian Orthodox. And so they came to New York, but they ended up in Lynchburg fairly early on. And Lena Oppleman, the wife, was a very dynamic, obviously, person and a woman of great character because Oppleman's was essentially named for her. And Oppleman's is the oldest pawn shop in the United States.
Yeah, I was going to ask if that was the...
That is.
Yeah.
And, we had mentioned the Guggenheimers and the Schules, right? Also, very prominent Schules department store started here way, way back in the day.
It was a marvelous store. When it was determined that I was going to come to Lynchburg College, Mother said, now you must be sure to go to Guggenheimer's. It's like Miller and Rhodes, only it's not in Richmond. And, of course, Millen Rhodes and Tallheimer's were the two big Virginia stores for about 100 years. And so I went to Guggenheimer's, and I was impressed. It was a lovely place. I was very sad when it closed.
Your grandmother used to order dry goods from Guggenheimer's, living down in Southwest Virginia near Bristol. And my aunt, my father's sister, worked for Mr. Guggenheimer. And it's interesting that when the Civil War began, Guggenheimer made the uniforms they made uniforms for the soldiers. And the interesting thing is that after World War II, one Guggenheimer makes uniforms for the Confederacy, and his descendant has clothing there to sell to the veterans when they come home from the war, which is a really interesting story. And when we got ready to do the Guggenheimer family, I called up General Max Guggenheimer and said, "General, we need your help." And we talked on several occasions, and he provided us with some really fascinating articles on the members of his family.
His articles were beautifully written.
Yeah, he's a VMI graduate. And so we have one Guggenheimer back in 1861 who's making uniforms for men to go off to war. And in 1945, you have another Guggenheimer with clothing to provide the guys coming back from a war with what they needed to step back into civilian life. It's a wonderful story. When the war started in December of 41, Mr. Guggenheimer, Max Guggenheimer, began to stockpile clothing, work clothes, everyday kind of clothes, Sunday go to meeting clothes, whatever a man might need to fit out a wardrobe, shoes, ties, you name it, and hats and overcoats. And my aunt said, "Mr. Guggenheimer, we're running out of storage space. Why are you buying up all these clothes?" And he said, "When the war ends, and it will, and our boys come home victorious, as they will, they're going to need clothes to get back into the swim of civilian life. And I'm going to have them everything they need, and they're going to be sold at 1941 prices." And so they did. And according to my aunt, within 3 months, everything was gone. And they came back starting in the latter part of 1945, well, some earlier than that. And it was all gone by Christmas. So it's an interesting family.
Yeah. And, obviously, another gentleman who's had a massive impact, maybe much more recently than a lot of the people we're talking about, Jerry Falwell Sr. Right? When we look back and we look at where Lynchburg is today, the growth of Liberty, obviously a big part of that, the life insurance policy that he left behind to help fund Liberty, the online, just the growth of that university, has been amazing and very instrumental in Lynchburg and what it's become today. Talk a little bit about Dr. Falwell and his impact on Lynchburg.
Not just that, about education. First, it's tobacco. Mm-hmm. And then when the tobacco market, after the invention of the cigarette rolling machine, moves to Danville and Durham, it becomes shoes. And Craddock and Terry puts boots on the soldiers going to France in 1917, mm-hmm. and boots in World War II. And then after shoes, it becomes education. And the oldest school in Lynchburg, oldest college, is Virginia University of Lynchburg. And then we have Randolph-Macon. We have Sweetbriar just outside the city. We have Lynchburg College now, the University of Lynchburg. We've got CVCC. And the sort of baby of the family is Liberty University. And they're all different in their own particular ways. But education is now big business. It's true that Centra is the largest employer in Lynchburg now, but education draws literally thousands of people to Lynchburg every year.
Mm. And people come to Lynchburg to go to school because of Dr. Falwell's reputation. And he did a number of very interesting things. He changed the city economically, clearly, because he brought through Liberty University, which was Liberty Baptist College at the beginning, folks who probably would have never come to Lynchburg, but were inspired by his message. Another thing he did was he was an evangelist, but unlike Lorenzo Dow, who was not interested in money, Dr. Falwell, saw that evangelism could change by the media of television, radio and television. More people could be reached, more money could be raised, institutions could be built in a way that had not been done before. We tend to think now that evangelists, well, anybody could get on a television. You could have your own private performance and get on TV and have followers and friends. But this was something that was really new and different before Jerry Falwell decided that this would be a new way to communicate his religious beliefs. He went to Lynchburg College for 2 years.
Yeah, that's where he started his academic career. But they bring in students bring in millions of dollars every year.
Yeah, it's a huge part of our economy right now.
And the quality of the restaurants in Lynchburg has improved immeasurably since the arrival of all these students.
We've talked about, and we can, and certainly folks can flip through the book and see lots of famous, recognizable names that they've known, and we've talked about a bunch of them.
Yeah.
But also, what's in this book are lots of people who folks may have never heard of or recognize the names. And you talked about Lorenzo Dow earlier as one of the people that you were glad that was in the book because you found his story fascinating. Let me ask you each for one or two of the essays that really impacted you, of folks that, people may not know.
Major General Curtis. He was a New Yorker, upstate, and Ogden, I think it's Ogdenville, New York. But in July of 1865, he was assigned to Lynchburg as the commander of the Lynchburg district. I think he was about the third one to do that. And they were in charge of the city and, of course, the area around it and a number of things that they had to do, like getting people to swear the oath of allegiance and sort of get the economy going again. But he arrives in Lynchburg in July of 65 and assembles the clergy and says, I'm going to organize a public school system, and I want you to recommend a number of men to form the first school board. And they did. And he asked a number of men if they would do this, and they 10 of them said yes. And so he organizes that fall 4 schools. And there are 2 for boys, 2 for girls, and separated by race as well as gender. And he had secured buildings in which the schools could be housed, and all of the supplies had been ordered, and that fall, we have schools in Lynchburg, public schools, no fees charged. They're public schools. Any child who wants to learn to read and write and do mathematics is welcome. It's not compulsory, but it's voluntary in the beginning. And from that will grow the city school system. You say, well, why this is so important? There was no public education in Virginia until after the Civil War, and Lynchburg schools predate the mandated schools in Virginia by 5 years.
Wow.
The state will not mandate education until 1870, and our schools have already been in operation for 5 years. And then in 1871, they will add 5 more schools here in Lynchburg, and it will be entirely civilian-run effort, because by that time Reconstruction is over. Now, the really fascinating thing about it, how do you pay for it? Fines, like you parked your horse and wagon in the wrong place and you didn't clean up after your horse, so you're going to pay a fine. He had collected at least $1,000 in traffic fines. He said, well, that's not a lot of money, but multiply that by 23, and that's a lot of money. And he was able to buy supplies, desks, pay the rent on these 4 buildings, but none of that went for salaries for the teachers. The city didn't have to pay for any teacher's salary. Do you know why?
Nope.
Because all of the teachers were Union soldiers.
Oh.
These are men who are stationed here in Lynchburg, and they were either schoolmasters before they joined the Army, or they were graduates of high schools in Indiana and Iowa and wherever. So they were qualified to teach basic skills to children. And their salaries are paid by the U.S. government. That's their assignment that General Curtis gave them. You're going to teach the 3rd grade. And it worked. And there are reporters from New York publications who come through Lynchburg, and they comment on the schools and how well they were run, and the discipline. There was no discipline when your teacher is an artillery captain or whatever. So I really have developed a real fondness for General Curtis and what he did, because he gave us public education, and that's one of the pillars that holds up a democracy, is an educated electorate, and Curtis did it for us. And there's a plaque down on the school administration building honoring Curtis and the first school board.
Wow. Interesting.
So he's one of my favorite people.
Bundy, you have one for me?
Well, I'm trying to decide which, but I think I'll settle on Frank Padgett. And his biography was written by Ashley Meyer, who was the head of our subcommittee. Many of the men who worked the James River as boatmen and bateaumen were enslaved. They were African Americans. There were some whites, but working the river was hard work and frighteningly dangerous work, and a lot of them were persons of color. And in January of 1854, there was a tremendous flood, a combination of snowfall and rainfall. Of course, we wouldn't know what that's like now in Lynchburg because it doesn't seem to rain anymore. But the James River rose 22 feet, and a boat got caught in the river, a canal boat, and got trapped in the rocks with people on it. And the water was obviously going to take the boat down if somebody didn't do something. And so they called Frank Padgett. Frank Padgett's dates, incidentally, are 1816, 1854. And so he came with some of his boatman friends and began to, he pulled his boat up near the one that was trapped in the rocks and loaded people off the endangered boat into his boat and ferried them to shore, and then he went back and forth and back and forth. And there were, I think, about 20 people on the boat that was trapped. And he got almost all of them off. And he went back for one last trip, and by this time it was clear that the canal boat was breaking up, but he was not going to leave those 3 men to die. And he gets there, he gets them into the boat, and all of a sudden a spring of water sort of rises up and gets under Frank Padgett's boat, and it collapses and rolls into the rapids, and they were drowned, all of them. Frank Padgett and the 2 men he had tried to save. There is a memorial, what would I call it?
Plaque.
And well, no, it's a stone. It's a stone to him for his heroics and his dedication and his care for other human beings. And this was at a time in the 1850s in which even if you were free, if you were African American, you were not treated with respect. And this is a man who deserved everyone's respect, and so much respect that a public memorial was put up in his honor. That'd be my choice. If I could meet anybody, I'd like to meet Frank Padgett.
And this book is filled with amazing stories.
Yes. 250
essays, more than 250 people, because we have couples and husband and wife combinations. The goal of this book, I mean, you touched on a little bit earlier, but even getting it into school systems, a big deal for you guys.
It's for the next generation. It's for the children who come along in the next 50 years and find in this book heroes and heroines from their own neighborhood, so to speak. And, you know, if they can do it, so can I. I can grow up to be a general. I can grow up to be a master teacher. I can grow up to be an artist or an actor or an actress or a lawyer or judge. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to reach the next generation and say, these are your people.
Not only that, but, you know, what you do, what you contribute, you know, doesn't have to be the biggest thing in the world, right? It could be a small contribution or one nice thing that you do that has an impact on a town or a city for, you know, decades or centuries down the road.
And it's not just middle-aged white men, which is how things started out in the beginning and sort of made us think we wanted to change that. They're women, they're persons of color, free and enslaved. They're people of modest means, both black and white. Everyone has a story and a role to play.
And there are people in there who are blessed with material goods who give back to their community in very, very special ways. Elizabeth Morton Forsyth, for instance, who endowed scholarships and educational programs, built Elizabeth's Early Learning Center because she was the heiress of the Morton Manufacturing Company, and she also is a granddaughter of one of the fleets. And so she gave back to the community. And there are people who've done that, the Guggenheimers and the Schulz. And so it's not just, generals and people of that ilk. These are people who have been blessed by fate, you might say, but they share with their community to make it a better place.
This book you guys described as a labor of love. 2 years working basically full-time to work with the different authors and writers who put these essays together and then editing them, putting the whole book together. You guys must be very proud of this.
We think it's the best thing we've ever done together. But it was not. Being an editor is not easy.
We don't plan on editing another book. Not in this life.
I gave a talk not so very long ago at the Old City Cemetery, and my editor from McFarland Press came, and they did my book on the POW camp that came out in 24, and I said to my editor, I said, I will never, ever criticize any change you make in anything I write. You just tell me what to do and I'll do it. Because I now know how difficult an editor's job is, and you've got to be cheerful, and you've got to be happy, and you can't be critical, and you've got to very carefully tiptoe around various and sundry things that the author does. So, but an editor's job is not easy.
Well, it's an amazing book, and I'll reiterate again, it is for sale. It's called A Good and Pleasant Company, Lives and Legacies of Central Virginia, on sale at Givens Books and the Old City Cemetery. What's next for you guys?
Thank you. And read it from the first note.
That's not what he asked you.
What?
He said, what's next?
What's next? Well, I'm working on a novel, but...
I'm seeing the husband-wife dynamic here that I'm used to.
Yeah. You said you didn't want to do any more writing anytime soon, but I bet I can talk her into it.
Well, I am a European historian. It would be nice. I started out as one. It would be nice to go back to some of my original things I used to like to study.
Well, it's awesome that you guys put this together for, I guess the 250th celebration, but just a great history of prominent and important people who have helped make Lynchburg what it is today.
Can I say one more time, and I can't say it enough, that so much credit, more credit in a way than we ever deserve, goes to Nancy Blackwell Marion, who took all this material and turned it into the beautiful book it is and supplied the pictures so thoughtfully chosen, so absolutely amazing. She is wonderful, wonderful to work with, talented. She's the perfect person
Patient.
to bring to bring this thing forth.
I looked at the cover that you have there, and it took my breath away because I thought, here is 9th Street as we know it today, and there it is as it was in 1860.
The way she blended that together. Yeah, there was at least one meeting while we sort of discussed covers, and then she came up with this, and we said,
This is it.
That's it. Yeah, sometimes you can just tell when it's the right thing.
And she chose to add the pictures of, I think,
The folks at the bottom.
16.
Yeah,
I think they're 8 on front and back. I'd have to count them again.
And an interesting group of people in itself.
Yeah, we had so many people that we didn't get a chance to talk about, but we certainly encourage people to grab the book and learn more about the history of Lynchburg and the people who had a prominent role in it over the last 250 years. Clif, Bundy, thank you so much for stopping by, joining me, and sharing more about this wonderful book. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for asking us.